So just a little bit of background on Think and a Drink. We meet every third Thursday of the month. And it just gives us an opportunity to speak and hear from curators, staff at HOMA, and local artists such as Kamran, who is here with us today, and just sort of pick their brain about the creative process and any upcoming exhibitions that we have at the museum, and just try and foster more of a sense of community within, the arts world here in Hawaii, and sort of see how everything connects and get a little bit of behind the scenes of the museum and the artists that we work with. So Kamran was so nice to send me a short little bio on him. So I'm just going to read that off, and then I will start the presentation and hand it off to him shortly. So Kamran grew up in rural Hamakua on the Big Island of Hawaii. With an Iranian Scandinavian background, Kamran's work is informed with a strong sense of individuality, which comes from making links between seemingly disparate genealogies and sources. This sense of self is what drives Kamran's artistic explorations, a belief in change, observing connections, and discovering a common origin for understanding all things. Kamran holds an MFA in sculpture and print media from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and is currently finishing up a year-long artist residency at Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture, and Design. I will go ahead and pass the virtual mic off to Kamran now, and I will share my screen and bring up his presentation.
So, first of all, thank you all for joining me this evening, and I'm really happy to share a little bit about, who I am, what it is I do, and hopefully answer some questions that you may have. And so I put together this little presentation sort of thing, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because you folks are probably curious about everything that is behind me. And so I want to save some time for talking about specific artworks, and it'll all come back around. So I just want to mention some key sort of points or ideas or thoughts, my artistic philosophy. And so we'll go through this slideshow, maybe 15 minutes or something. And so you can go ahead to the first slide, please.
Go to the next slide.
And so very briefly at the beginning here, I want to show this short video that, so those of you that have been to the museum in the last few months, you may have seen my exhibition. So here's a photo of the installation, and it's in the Islamic Gallery next to the coffee bar. So if you haven't been down there yet, make sure you stop by. The exhibition will be up until August, I believe. So you still have some time. So this exhibition was the first of two that are components of my artist residency, which I'm kind of wrapping up this month at Shangri-La. So it's been a very unusual year for all of us, but it's been a really in an interesting way. It's been a very productive and satisfying and meaningful year for me to work down at Shangri-La, and to even through months of sort of relative isolation and lockdown, to have that sort of outlet or extension to that place while the world is going through all this kind of craziness was really meaningful to me. And so some of the artwork, well, all of the artwork in this exhibition, In Stillness, which is at the museum, was kind of created and come up with during these periods of time during lockdown and isolation. And so I want to start by showing a short, like 2-minute video that Shangri-La produced for that exhibition. And it kind of sums it up. I'm happy to talk more about specific artworks, of course, maybe after my little presentation here. But yeah, maybe we can just show that video real quick, please. For the past year, I've been thinking a lot about the passage and effects of time, specifically change. I'm intrigued by these forces of nature, and this body of work was born out of my meditations on them. While these artworks embody motion, they also contain stillness, moments of simplicity and silence, which contrast our noisy and complicated world. Elimination is made from layered sheets of Japanese washing paper, gradually reaching away from the wall, forming a bridge between our space and that which is beyond sight. This piece is a visual manifestation of change, its rhythm and intervals inviting contemplation on movement and impermanence. Together, these intervals form an entity with a presence, floating in suspended animation. The ink paintings, which together are called Continuum, speak of time's passage, with each brushstroke synchronized with the exhalation of breath. In one sense, these paintings measure and document time, but they're also a record of pieces of my life, a reflection on my own mortality. When I paint, I feel no separation between myself, the brush, the ink, the surface, and most importantly, the spaces between them. This moment of transcendence helps not only to keep me grounded, but also to see the beauty which lies in every moment. Okay, so yeah, that was kind of a quick overview of the artworks that are down at Homa. And so some of the remnants or I guess descendants of those paintings and those artworks are actually here in my studio, and so I'll point them out, like this one behind me, which maybe you can't see right now because the the screen is being shared. So I'll point that out afterwards. But moving on, so this is a picture of me in my workshop, and so you can kind of get a sense of it's much too dingy and dark for this video for our chat right now, but you can get a sense of kind of the architecture of that space. But I want to point out when my artistic process, I work in two different ways. So I sort of break this down as idea driven versus materially driven. And the difference between these two, because I'm often asked like, oh, how do you start a new, artwork? And I kind of take a moment to consider, do I want to express what I know, or am I discovering, did I find some material that's really beautiful and I want to express what the material knows, and by extension what I know the material contains. And so it's sort of, and in the end those two things aren't really that different, but it's just really is it coming from me, from the inside of me, or is it coming from the inside of an object, of material, a stone, a piece of wood, paint and canvas? I mean, those materials, when they're combined, they're sort of a third space that's activated. That's the space between the canvas and the ink that then comes into the painting. And I think that's presence, that's energy, that's the essence of movement and motion and time. And so this is to say I'm sort of captivated or interested in all materials. So I don't have one specialty. Um, I'm much too uh, excited by everything around me to focus on just one thing. So next slide, please. So, something that I'm always looking for when I am when a particular artwork is sort of emerging from a materially driven perspective or entry point, I'm really interested in finding what it is that that material contains. So the essence of, in this case, the stone, what is sort of hidden within the stone that we all know it's there. I mean, we may have different words for it or different beliefs that kind of govern it, but I think we can all agree that there's something special about a stone. And when that stone is kind of taken off the ground and put in front of you and shown to you, I believe that you can feel that, whatever it is to you, there's something there. And so to me, it's sort of the essence of the material. It's the spirit of the stone. It's the stone's past, it's the stone's present, and it's the stone's future. And all of that is contained. And so when I start working from a material, I'm really interested in kind of pulling that spirit out and then showing it, giving it a space so that it can be seen or further appreciated. And so in this example here, I call it releasing or revealing what is inherent in the material. So here there's a core was taken out of this piece of basalt stone, and that negative space that now exists was embellished with gold leaf. And as it was put on the surface, the gold leafing cracked according to the texture of the stone surface. And so it was sort of this recombination of, one mineral to another mineral, a fusion of these two perhaps opposite materials, common stone and gold, but they're actually coming from the same place. They're coming from the earth. So it's a recombination of familiar elements. Next slide, please. So another way I kind of approach material is holistically. When I work with wood, when I identify a piece of wood that I want to use, it's important that I consider the wood in its in the totality of its sort of existence. So for the example of wood, also consider not just the piece of wood that's in front of me, but the fact that it was once a tree that came from a seed, and that seed required rain, and that seed grew from the earth. And the tree is all of these things. And now it's maybe cut down into a solid block of wood, like this picture here, which was actually a beam from the old Ward warehouse that was torn down years ago. And so I acquired a bunch of these beams, and they're just really beautiful for sculpture. And what I'm interested in doing in these sculptures is finding the tree in that very square rectangular block of wood, because the tree still exists in there. And so my job is to pull it out and remind you that this was once a tree. And in fact, it still is. It's just a tree in its next stage of existence as a sculpture. And perhaps its future stage of existence will be, firewood, or who knows. But it was once a tree, now it's a sculpture, and then who knows what it will be next. So next slide. So that's sort of materially driven. The other sort of opposite, or not opposite, but other end of entering an artwork is idea driven. So, and again, I said these two things are not all that different. Here's an example of a geometric abstraction of Leahi, which is, as you know, diamond head. That's the Hawaiian name for diamond head. So thinking about this landform, and what I'm really interested in is not so much the specifics of how diamond head looks, Although of course it is magnificent and beautiful, and we're all familiar with the way it looks, right? The Waikiki, typical snapshot. But I'm interested not so much how it looks, but what it contains. So the essence beneath the physical appearance. And to me, that might be sort of this moving, gradual, diminishing sequence of geometric forms. It's really the mountain form stripped down to its most essential nature. And the color is removed, and it's really just pure form and emptiness or empty space. And so that's what this image that you're looking at here is. It's a large sculpture that I'm working on that is a reduction or abstraction of Leahi. And there's a couple, well, I'll show you them later in the background of my studio. Next slide. So painting is, although many people perhaps haven't seen my painting work until the paintings were sort of unveiled in my exhibition at the museum. I've been painting for several years. And what is so interesting to me about painting is the way it can capture the passage of time, which is something that I'm interested in across the board with all of the material that I use. In fact, probably the most simple reason that stone interests me so much is the fact that it tells a story beyond time. So it contains that essence of time's passage in a way that very few things in our world can tell us. And painting is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum in that it can happen in an instant. And those brush strokes that you see in this picture in the background, and which I'm in the process of demonstrating, it's 2-3 seconds to create a brushstroke. The presence of me connecting with the ink, connecting with the paper, asserting my own existence and saying I am here, and that was especially useful or important to me during lockdown, and when the whole world is up in the air. It's like, well, I don't know what's going on, but I do know that I'm alive, and I know that I'm breathing, and I'm here, and I'm going to celebrate the fact that I am here. And so each brushstroke was sort of a mantra, repeating that, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And with each brushstroke, it was releasing a breath. So I would inhale and then exhale as I paint. And so it was sort of this presence of me on the canvas. And then the absence, when I step away, I'm no longer there on the, with the brush creating that mark. And so that mark is sort of an artifact or remnant of that brief but very meaningful interaction with me and the material. And so, I have here economy of form. This is a sort of a phrase that I use to describe part of my artistic philosophy. What is absolutely necessary to communicate what I'm interested in communicating? And that is why I strip away often color, specific details that tell you in that previous example that this is a specific mountain form that Leahi. I'm not so interested in the fact that that mountain is sometimes green and sometimes brown and sometimes black and covered with grass and it looks like, this certain way. I want to get beneath that or beyond that physical, the image of the place. And so what can I strip away but still retain what is interesting to me, which is the essence of that place, the essence of that material, the essence of the brushstroke, the passage of time, the presence. So I'm not a minimalist artist because I believe that there's something needs to be there. Um, the ultimate idea, if minimalism got what it really wanted, it would be nothing at all, right? So to strip away until there's nothing left. Well, I need there to be something left, but I want to communicate it very clearly and succinctly. So what can I remove and still communicate? And that's kind of what I'm searching for or trying to do. Next slide. So, this pair here, just a single brush stroke. I called this pair Emergence, and these were actually created after the paintings at the museum. And these are sort of expressions of the immaterial. So, you know, painting is something that I've been really drawn to for many years because it's so immediate. And in that sense, it's the complete opposite of working on a stone sculpture, which takes an incredible amount of time and focus and extreme patience, right? And very, steady hand. You hold the stone, you push it very steadily, but you have to be right there with the blade contacting the stone because if you start thinking about something else, then you can break the stone or you can cut your finger off, right? So you have to be there, but it takes a very, um, a lot of time. And painting is immediate. So I can make a difference. I can do something right now in this second. I can express the fact that I'm here, that way I'm feeling that day. Uh, I can think about nothing at all and kind of just zone out and become one with the paint, but I can do it right now. Sumi Ink is Japanese calligraphy ink, and traditionally it's made from the ash of cedar trees, and then it's mixed with a sort of a bone binder or glue. It can also be an oil-based or a wheat-based kind of glue, but it's a Japanese traditional calligraphy ink. So next slide, please. So here's a nice little quote that, thinking about what I'm interested in, where does my art come from? Where does my artistic, my creativity or my impulse to create, where does that come from? And, so I grew up out in the country on the Big Island in Laupahoehoe. If some of you know where that is, you get extra credit. Um, I'm sure many of you do actually. So outside of Hilo, and it's a very rural, really beautiful, charming, rainy, green place. And I grew up out there, but my dad is actually from Iran, and so my name is Persian. I'm named after my grandfather, who I never met, uh, and my mom is Norwegian, but she's from Minnesota, and so she's not at all in touch with, the our Viking ancestors. And so it's like growing up on the Big Island as a very obviously Howley kid, right? Who my parents are definitely not from here. I'm definitely not. I don't look like I'm from here. And so where is it that I really belong? Because I also don't belong in Iran. I don't know anything about Iran really, other than my name's from there and the very little that my father taught us growing up. But he is very disconnected, and he's kind of proud that he's not super traditional Persian. And so thinking about where is it that I really belong in this world? And much of my life growing up, and I'm sure many of you have felt the same way, wherever it is you're from or wherever it is you live, but just questioning identity and connection to place and where is our true home. Um, and so this quote, getting back to the slide here, this is a quote from Rumi, which I'm sure you all know, the poet. And I'll just read it real quick. It says, "My place is the placeless. My trace is the traceless. 'Tis neither body nor soul, for I belong to the soul of the beloved. I have put duality aside. I've seen that the two worlds are one. When I seek, when I know, when I see, when I call. So for me, when I create art, I'm making a physical embodiment of that placeless place. It's a Each art object I create is a place that my spirit can reside. And so it doesn't matter where it is I'm living or where I really belong, I can belong in each one of the artworks that I make. And so in that sense, my home grows the more art I make and the more at home I am in this world. And Hawaii is definitely my home and it always has been. But I still question, you know, where it is I really belong. Is it here? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's somewhere else. So um, this painting, anyway, is from the trace list, and it's sort of inspired by this passage, but also wanting to create this sort of this home or uh, calling to that source of where my artistic inspiration comes from. Next slide. So this pair was also created over the last, I don't know, 6 months. And the way I create artwork is I work on many, many pieces at once. So there's like 6 or 7 different artworks sort of getting built or being created at any given time. And so these paintings were kind of, while I was working on the In Stillness works at Homa, these paintings were being worked on at the same time, along with a bunch of other stuff. And they emerged over months and layers of paint and pigment and water and washing it away and then putting it back on and putting it out in the rain and just adding and subtracting and scraping um, and they're titled Brilliance, and to me it's communicating that same thing. It's sort of this emergence, this explosion of light or darkness, and realizing that those aren't opposites. They're actually two sides of the same coin or ends of the same spectrum. And it's sort of that idea of non-duality. We need both of those things. We can't just choose one or the other. They're the same thing. And so this pair of paintings kind of communicate that non-dualistic approach or belief that I have. Next one, please. Okay, so um, going to moving forward, I want to give you all a very special sneak preview of the artworks I have been working on and the artworks that will be displayed down at Shangri-La in March. So as Jetty mentioned, so the exact date isn't set yet, but mid-March, look out for announcement, or I'm sure, I don't know what the communication system is, but anybody who's interested, either send me an email or send Jetty an email. I'm happy to add you to my mailing list, and I can let you know when the show actually opens. But mid-March, I'm gonna have an exhibition down there, and it's all new work that is being created right now and has been worked on over the last year. So it's separate work from what is at Homa. And I'm going to give you a preview of these new artworks. But they're secret, so don't tell anybody. All right, next slide, please. So in the courtyard at Shangri-La, and many of you have been down there, I'm sure. So you know the courtyard, when you walk down the stairs, you enter the house, walk down the stairs, there's this little pond there. I'm creating a sculptural installation. And I'm going to be real brief about these pieces because I don't want to reveal too much. But this is a computer rendering of these sculptures. So 9 sculptures, different sizes, different materials. And this piece is about ancestry and the transmission that happens through generations. So what have I learned, or what have I been given from the ancestors that I've never met? And even if I did meet them, I couldn't speak to them. I couldn't communicate with words. And so what would be exchanged, or what has already been exchanged? And so it's using these kind of geometric or architectonic forms to sort of create totems or monuments to my ancestors, but they're also it's also a meeting point where perhaps they stand in for these ancestors I've never met, and it can be the first time that I meet them face to face. Next one, please. So there's a separate body of work in a different space that will be paintings from the earth, and these are acknowledgments of place, acknowledgments of the earth that is beneath Shangri-La. And it's the living rock that exists on site. And so there are these beautiful boulders that are exposed on the property. And the first time I went down there over a year ago, I walked around and I was kind of just observing, and these stones really stood out to me. And I knew I had to do something with them. And so these are rubbings from the stone, and they don't so much capture the specific, the look of the stone or the texture or the shape, but they capture, again, that kind of essence or the spirit within the stone, pulling that through the canvas and then putting it on the surface. So that's this series of 3 paintings. And then the last slide. So the third body of work is a pair of paintings, and these are kind of about that idea of building a home for my spirit or for myself. And I call them, I don't know the actual title yet, but they're kind of foundational. They're created by laying down a layer of sort of cement or grout on the canvas surface, and then pouring ink and paint over that surface. So it's very structured, but it's also very organic and kind of fluid. And so this approach is directly related to the existence of the earth and the water at Shangri-La. So spending time down there and sort of channeling these two, again, not opposites, but in fact very much the same opposite ends of the spectrum, but these two elemental aspects of earth and aspects of our own personality. I know for me, I'm definitely like stone and like water at different times. So these paintings sort of are a combination of those two, so methodical and intuitive in one. So I think that's the last one, yeah. Oh yeah, so I just want to invite you to see more of my artwork. You can, if you're interested, check out my website there, kamransamimi.com. You can always send me an email, follow me on Instagram if you choose. And if you're ever interested, I'm just going to do a quick plug. My artwork is for sale, so if you're ever interested, just let me know, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Okay. All right. So hopefully none of you fell asleep.
No, that was incredible. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to share some of the work behind you. I was just going to let everybody know, if you want to toggle at the top, you can choose what you're viewing. So if you choose who's talking, and then we all mute ourselves, then Kamran will show up the largest possible screen on GoToMeeting so that we can see some of the work that he has behind him. So I'll give you a few more minutes if you did want to share that, Kamran, and then we usually do like a quick Q&A at the end. So whenever you're ready for that, we can open up the floor.
Okay, and we finish at 6:30. Is that right?
Yeah, we usually finish around 6:30.
Okay, so about 20 minutes. So where do I begin? I'll kind of get out of the way a little bit and just sort of show, and you guys can maybe enlarge my screen, and I can bring my computer around too to show individual artworks. But basically, so I have a workspace, and then I have this sort of clean workspace. And so once artwork is finished, I bring it into kind of this room. So it's sort of a showroom or storage room. And so as you can see, it's very full. it's often quite full. And but it's not always like this because I can't use the space when everything's out. So there's just a combination of sculptures, paintings. I'm going to bring my computer around so you can get close. I'll try and keep my screen steady. Um, I'll just point out some different things, and then if you folks have questions about specifics, just let me know. And feel free to type in something as I'm talking too. Um, I want to mention this painting. So you can sort of see the scale here. Now, this is the exact same size as the paintings at Homa. And actually, I was mentioning earlier, sort of um, the the children or the offshoot of those artworks. This is one of them. So it was the same size as the Homa paintings. It actually was one of the paintings from that show that I didn't really like. And so it became something else. And the artwork down at Homa is the paintings are about the passage of time, right? Visualizing the passage of time and my experience as a being who is, for better or for worse, subject to time, the effects of time. And so I thought, if I'm really meditating on time and thinking about its effect on me, um, why not continually work a painting over and over and over to sort of develop its the evidence of time or the impression or presence of time on the surface. So this is actually it's in some ways an absurd painting because what I'll do is I'll do brush strokes like back and forth, synchronized with the breath. Then once the paint dries, I'll use the opposite color. So if I paint on black, then I'll paint over with white to sort of uh, an attempt to claim back the time that I lost or the time that was given to the painting. But of course, that's impossible. And there's always a remnant of that black paint beneath the white that's painted on top of it. And then the white dries, and then the next day I'll paint more black on it. And so this has probably 30 or 40 layers of black and white done over 30 or 40 days. I kept track for a month and then I was like, I'm going to just keep going. And so I did. So it's over a month's worth of every day laying a layer of black and then laying a layer of white. And so it has this sort of pulsation or this vibration to it that is, the culmination of just layers and layers and layers. But what I think is really cool is that if you look really close, and it may be hard to see on the screen, you can see some of the very first layer still intact on the surface. And the ink that I used is kind of watered down because I want that translucent quality, the layering and um, the building up of depth, even though it is a flat surface, but it has sort of the illusion of depth. I'm just reading this comment here. Um, and So I'm not going to talk about everything here because there's way too much stuff, but I'll just go through a couple of things. Um, Here's a sculpture that I really like, and the story behind this stone piece. I'll get a little closer. This is a stone that was split. So it was a kind of a square stone, and then I drilled holes and split the stone. Um, and if you're ever curious how that's done, you can look it up on YouTube. It's really a cool process, splitting stone. But it's the way people split gigantic boulders, and you see those lines like channels in the stone. That's actually from the splitting process. Anyway, so this was a single stone that was split diagonally, and then those two pieces were actually stacked to create kind of a long triangular piece. But the story behind this stone is it actually was from a foundation of a house that I lived in down the street, and they tore down that house, and all of the stones were left in the yard. And my neighbor, who is a really cool guy, told me, oh, a lot of the stones from these foundations are actually they were ballast stones. They were used to balance ships from a long time ago when ships would come over and then take a bunch of sugarcane or stuff and then ship it back home. They would throw these stones overboard to counterbalance. And so there's all these stones, and I'm sure many of you know about this story, but there are all these stones kind of scattered throughout the island. And so there were some in the old house, and I think they're kind of like a granite or a sandstone. It's a stone that doesn't grow here, but it's really beautiful. And so I used that stone and split it and kind of put it into a sculpture. So to me, this sculpture contains some of that history, some of that very complicated use. Um, but now it's turned into something that has a new life of its own and that honors the material for the material itself. And so I like that material itself. Some Here's a piece of basalt that is cored out, and this was done with a water jet. So it's water that is sprayed at a super high pressure. It's basically like super fast-paced erosion, water wearing down stone and then cutting it, which I think is really cool conceptually, and also really beautiful. And so, and this is the area that was removed from that. So I don't like to throw anything away. Use every part, right? So eventually I'll find a use for it. Um, a smaller version of that Leahi abstraction that I showed a picture of. Um, there's another abstraction of Mauna Kea. Some different, stonework, a piece of driftwood from the Big Island, piece of driftwood that I found with my dad. He's a builder and has done construction for many years, but he loves collecting stuff and material, and so that's some of where I can blame him for some of my material addiction. um, some paintings in here. So there's a couple of questions I'm going to see. Fred Shang, great emergence. Oh, thanks. Oh, someone's mic is on.
Oh, I think I muted them, so you should be good to go.
Okay, cool. In emergence, unlike their offspring, did you say these were single brush strokes? Yes, emergence is single brush strokes. They remind me of Zen ink circle paintings. Do you make your own brushes? Yes, I do make my own brushes. I don't have any in here actually, but I combine multiple brushes and I attach them to kind of a brace. And that the cool thing about that is that they're modular. So I can actually remove a brush if I want a smaller size or put a couple brushes on if I want it to be bigger. So if you go to the museum and you look at those paintings, they're actually all the same brushes. It's just one is a 18-inch, 5 or 6 different brushes, and then one is like 1 or 2 brushes. Yeah, the Enso is the Zen painting that you're thinking about, and that very much is part of uh, the idea or the inspiration behind this work. And Enso actually is a Zen meditative painting, Zen calligraphy, and so in meditation you focus on the breath, right? That's sort of your center, and uh, it's becoming one with the breath, but also when it comes out in painting, in Zen painting, it is becoming one with the paint and the brush, and no separation. And that's very much part of the process, and that's something I'm practicing. Yeah, for idea-driven 3D projects. Yeah, actually, so these these pieces are done. They're modeled on the computer, and then they're sent to a computer-controlled router that actually cuts them out of material. And so again, it's idea-driven, or it's kind of taking the form that I envision and then finding an application for that. So it can be wood, it can be metal, um, different materials, but the material comes second. The idea comes first.
Did Shangri-La have any restrictions um, on any part of your work that you want to display there in terms of materials or size or location that you wanted to exhibit?
Yeah, it's quite complicated. I mean, there are not so much restrictions, but it's a conversation between me, Leslie Mickelson, who is the curator down there, and then the director too. Um, so it's a conversation between many of the people working down there, what is suitable for which particular space, what is actually possible to do, so there were a number of considerations throughout the yeah.
So can you share something that you wanted to do that you found out it was not going to be possible?
Well, I mean, I had so many ideas. It's such a wonderful space. I mean, and I've been working down there for a year. So as you can imagine, every time I go down there, I gain something, right? And so really the difficulty was streamlining, like, okay, what actually can be done in the amount of time that we have to install. Um, Also, the fact that the visitation, they're working out what visitation will be like in the future, as is everywhere else. And so we don't really know that. So there there are certain things that must be considered or adjusted according to that too. And um, so yeah, I mean there were a number of ideas, but I'm really excited about what I'm actually doing down there, and I'm really happy to share that particular work. And it's one of those cases, even though I'm sharing three distinct bodies of work, which is quite a lot. Um, it's quality over quantity kind of thing. So that's what I tell myself at least. Um,
Have you had any contact with the East Hawaii Cultural Center in Hilo?
Not recently. When I was a kid, my mom would do yoga class there, and we'd go to like plays and stuff there. So I have really fond memories of going there. And I had a piece in a show there probably
Hmm.
6 or 7 years ago, but no, I haven't been there recently.
Well, I'm going to send your name to somebody I know who is very involved with it. They might be
Oh yeah.
who also lives at Lapahoihoi.
Oh, no kidding. Who is it? Do you mind me asking?
His name is Larry Butler. He's a an
Oh,
emeritus professor from George Mason University. He's a professor of art history, and he's very much now involved in the cultural center there and
oh,
helps
cool.
put on displays. So I think you would be a perfect person for him to be in contact with.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. I'm happy to talk story with him. A couple more pieces I'm going to point out. I know we're getting close to the time. Um, this is a painting that is probably hard to see. Uh, it Well, I guess it is a self-portrait, but it started as a more traditional self-portrait, which is something I never do. Um, I never do any sort of representational or realistic or attempts at realism, I should say, because it's not even close. But one of the challenges working down at Shangri-La is working with Leslie Mickelson, who is an incredible curator. And I owe so much of the things that I've discovered and developed over the last year. I owe them to the discussions I've had with her, the questions that she's asked. And so there's this assignment that she gave me. We were talking about process and where my work comes from. And she said, I know that form is really important to you. So I challenge you to make an artwork that is intentionally ugly, that you think is really ugly. And I thought, well, that's just absurd. Why would I, what a waste of time. I'm not going to do that. And she's like, well, then that's why you should do it, because you won't do it. Like, it seems pointless, right? And it was really, really difficult for me. Not to say like, oh, my work is always looks really great. It's never ugly. But to intentionally make something knowing that it will be ugly is very difficult because it goes against everything that I stand for. Everything I believe to be true, it goes against. So I made a self-portrait, and I made it kind of look like me, and it was terrible. And it was, like I said, it was very painful to do that. But I got to this point where it was sort of like, well, what I learned from that process is to let go a little bit, um, let go about my preconceptions of what art should be, what my art needs to look like, because I do have a distinct style or aesthetic, and every artist does. But to give a little bit of that and see what else can kind of make itself sort of known or emerge, and it's still going to be my work, but without putting so many constraints ahead of time. And so anyway, this started as a portrait, a self-portrait, and then I, of course, layered over and developed it, and then continued to layer with, yeah, I know it's hard to see, but oil paint, and then layers of Japanese mulberry paper, washi, which is actually what the piece at the museum, Emanation, the hanging sculpture, is made from. So this is layers of washi that are actually affixed to the canvas surface. And then on top of that, they're wrinkled and then they're applied. So there's a great amount of texture on the surface. And then it's layers of indigo pigment and ink poured on the surface. And watching the way that that ink follows the channels of the washi and kind of bleeds and drips, and something else is sort of emerges from that. And so now this went from a portrait of my likeness to a portrait of maybe my spirit, or that which is beneath my likeness. And so, which I think is actually a more accurate depiction of who I am. It's not just what I look like, but it's who I actually am. And that's, a being without physical limitations. And so a lot of my artwork kind of comes from that place, searching for that thing that exists beyond the physical. And I think time and change are some things that are clearly connected to that. And so I'm very much interested in questioning what that means and what that looks like and what that could look like. So you can kind of see,
Kamran,
yeah.
what about ideas that are ugly? So,
Mm.
let's see, racism. How would you apply your talent to a piece to express your feeling about an ugly idea?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Right behind me, another piece that's hard to see because it's textured and it's a lot of black. This painting was made in direct response to police brutality towards black people. So the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd, before the protests, but when it just happened, I was so upset, as many of us were. And this is not political. This is transcending politics. Just I was so angry and upset and feeling like, wow, there's really nothing I can do. I'm sitting here by myself at home, you know, and what am I going to do? Well, I'll use the tools and the skills that I have available to me. And I have a canvas and I have paint. And so what this came from was channeling that anger and those feelings, putting paint on the canvas surface and then pushing it back and forth vigorously with a scraper. And so it's just layers and layers and layers of oil and acrylic and different shades of black, but pushed across the surface and kind of channeled. And it's a large canvas, and so it's a very physical process. And it kind of exhausted me. But I felt like that's a good outlet for that anger because I had no other place to put it. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, that's a good point though. That's one of the things that art is for people, right? It can be a way to channel these very unpleasant emotions and feelings that we have, something productive to do with them. Um, yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. Any other questions or something that maybe you saw and want me to talk more about?
I had a
Anybody?
quick question, maybe to wrap us
Yeah,
up.
of course.
I know that, or I've observed that a lot of your pieces have a lot of texture and a lot of layering, um, and you even put some pieces out in the rain. When do you know that it's done? Like, were you
Mm.
watching it in the rain and then you were like, okay, that's the perfect drip, and then you have to like pull it into your studio?
Well, this is a really good question that there is no answer to.
Okay.
Which, the questions are more interesting than the answers anyway. Um, no, I mean it's the answer that every abstract artist will tell you. It's like, oh, it's a feeling. It's I just feel when it's right. Um, and yeah, that is true. But it's a feeling, and it's an observation, and it's a conversation with the artwork. So if it's a painting, it's what is it that you want to be? I in a way I ask the painting, what is it that you want to be? And are you there yet, or no, yes or no? And usually it's no. And so it's like, okay, so how can I help you get there? I mean, and it's not a formal conversation, of course, but it's questioning the painting, but it's questioning myself. It's what do I know about this painting to decide if it's mature or um, and so many of these artworks, like that pair I showed you, Brilliance, I worked on those over 5 months because they just weren't quite finished yet. And you can, again, it's a feeling. You can tell like something is not quite there, but I'm getting close. And then sometimes I do something and it's like, oh, I went too far and I missed it. And so the 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 painting becomes quiet again. The closer I get, the louder it speaks or the more it comes to life. And then if I go too far, then it gets quiet. And so it's like, okay, I got to go back and try and find that voice again or find that, the spirit. And it's the same with carving a block of wood. You know, you have to really be careful not to carve too much. And when you do carve too much, then you take the woodness out of the wood. And then it's just a thing that, a human made, right? And so to me, to honor the material is the most important thing. So how do I further honor it by interacting with it? And the same goes for stone and painting. And sometimes you do very little or you do nothing at all. Sometimes the wood is just perfect as it is, and it just needs to be displayed as is. And other times it's a really beautiful piece of wood, but there's there's something hiding beneath the surface that's even more beautiful, and so that must be discovered. So those are like some of the things that I think about, but it's every time it's different. There is no one answer. Um, Sometimes it's super easy and it's just like, oh yeah, that's it, one thing. The the prints that I do from stone, I didn't really talk about them, but here's one of them, and many of you may have seen them in the past at Honolulu printmakers or different places in town. Um, I mean, these are examples of, just to show another one. So the stone is selected for its form and its texture. So it's a piece of basalt that is processed with ink, or rubbed with ink and then run through a printing press. And then as it goes through the press, it cracks a little more each time, and that's where these sort of fissures are created. And so to me, the first few prints that I get from any given block, the stone hasn't kind of warmed up yet. The cracks haven't matured, and so by the fifth or sixth print, it's starting to kind of come into being. And I just know, I mean, it's like the desired amount of complexity and simplicity. There's a balance. It's all about balance. And with these prints, if it's too simple and unbroken, then it's not there yet. And if it breaks too much and it's too fractured, then it's too complicated and too busy. So you have to find that little point that is when the material or the artwork speaks the loudest. Yeah.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I find it interesting how it's just that point, right? And so sometimes you go past it and then you're like, oh no, gotta go back if you can go
It's
back, right?
it's very frustrating, and sometimes you can't go back, and you're like, well, all right, I got to learn from that. Yeah, yeah.
Do we have any final questions for Kamran? Oh, Patricia. Let's see if I can. Okay, I've unmuted you, Patricia. Maybe Patricia, do you want to write your question in the chat? I think the audio is a little bit funky. That would be great, and then we can go ahead and read that aloud. And I know Kamran touched on it earlier, but hopefully we will have more information soon on specific details for the Shangri-La opening. So, you know, Kamran and I will keep you in the loop on that. That'll definitely be something exciting that we'll all look forward to, and hopefully we can come see that in person. It's been ages
Yeah.
since Shangri-La, so I'm excited.
And that exhibition should be, again, it's all up in the air, but it should be open until August, just like the Homa exhibition. They'll be concurrent. So hopefully there will be time when it works. We're also, Shangri-La is going to be making a video tour and all that of that exhibition. So at the very least, there will be a video component.
Great.
Oh, that's what Patricia's question was.
Wonderful.
So,
I guess
yeah.
we just
we knew it, right? You knew it. Mid-March is when you can kind of look for it. And so check their social media, check my social media. Yeah, feel free to send me an email. I can add you to my mailing list. Yeah.
And just to wrap up, I wanted to let everybody know we've been on GoToMeetings since last July or August, but we will be switching over to Zoom next month, just to let everybody know. I will be, yes, yay, lots of applause from everybody. So I will be including it in the same way, the link in the same way in the email invitations that I send you folks. But just be cognizant that it will be a Zoom link and not a GoToMeeting link. So I will send that out shortly for March and beyond. But if you folks have any questions to follow up with Kamran, please email me and I will pass those along. And like we said earlier, we'll definitely be keeping you folks in the loop on his upcoming exhibitions. So thank you again so much, Kamran. Virtual round of applause for you. That was
it's
wonderful.
my pleasure. Thank you all for joining me this evening. Happy to share.
And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a good night. Take care.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Bye.